Welcome to Season 2 of Telling Tales. This season we meet up with some old friends and make some new ones. I'll take you on adventures through time, visit mysteries and answer questions such as where does Mustafa Khan go next? And what happened to John Paul Docherty? Welcome to Telling Tales Season 2, written and presented by me, Jeff Price. John Paul Docherty and the Mucky Mag, Part 2. The park shelter was a concrete horror. There was nowhere to sit, the roof leaked, and a bitterly cold wind swept through the park on its way from the Russian steppes to freeze the fingers off the shipyard workers on the River Tyne. John Paul shouted to his friends, "Shifty, Robbo, come over here and see what I've found." John Paul had known Shifty since the first year of Sacred Heart Primary School, and the three were the mortal enemies of the park keeper, and a pain in the neck side of their... They were the mortal enemies of the park keeper, and a pain in the backsides of their mothers. The three pals sat down on the rubbish-strewn floor of the shelter. John Paul pulled his shirt up and pulled out the magazine. "Look, have you ever seen anything like this in your life?" And they each gasped. As each page was turned. They pointed, but mostly they just groped. They pointed, but mostly they just gawped at the pictures of the naked young women. Shifty took his one good eye off the page and turned to John Paul and said, "I'll buy it off you. How much?" It was not always possible to know where Shifty was looking. After he lost one eye in a bike accident 3 years ago, his glass eye had the habit of not moving when the other one was looking elsewhere. Robbo quickly followed with a, "No, me, I'll buy it." Robbo was the adopted son of Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. Mr. Robinson was the church organist at St. Robert's, and Mrs. Robinson was the chairwoman of the Catholic Women's Guild. They were unctuously pious people who liked to remind everyone that their son was adopted, usually followed by a, "He came from a bad home," much to Robbo's embarrassment. "Nobody's buying it, at least not yet." John Paul took out the scissors and started to cut out one of the pictures. He held it and said, "One picture, 1 penny. Here's how it's going to work, and it's how we're going to make a fortune. We cut up the magazine, we take the pictures to school, and we sell them. I'll give you 10 pictures, you pay me 8 pence, and when you sell 10 for a penny each, you make 2 pence. 5 pennies for 10, Shifty said. 7, John Paul held out his hand. 6, said Robbo. The other two looked at him. "Shut up, Robbo, or you won't get any." And John Paul snapped back. Robbo was going to say something, but he decided to keep quiet instead. It took them nearly an hour of argument to cut up the magazine, as there were often pictures on both sides of the page, and it was a tough call to know which one was the best choice. In the end, there was nearly 100 pictures to sell. "Here's the plan. I take them into school, hide them somewhere. You get 10 pictures each. When you sell your 10, you come and see me and give me the 7 pence, and I'll give you another 10. We'll have to be careful. If the teachers or the prefects find out, we'll be in big trouble. Just tell whoever you sell it to. If they're caught, just say they found them. If anyone grasses us up, then they don't get any more. Understand?" "Yes, John Paul," Shifty and Robbo said in unison. The next day, John Paul was ready for school early. "Morning, John Paul," his mother said as she appeared in the kitchen. She looked up at the kitchen clock and said, "What's up?" She knew her sons well enough to know if John Paul was up early, then John Paul was up to something. Usually he was up to no good. "I've made porridge for your breakfast. Sit down." Sheila Docherty stared at her son and could see in an instant that whatever it was, it fell into the no good category. "Sport is it today?" John Paul looked at his shoes. No, ma'am," he said in a barely audible voice. His mother lunged forward and grabbed his ear and pulled him up out of his seat. "Ma, you're hurting me," he grasped out. "What are you up to, you little bastard? Tell me now." She pulled even harder on his ear. "No, ma'am, let go." "I know you, John Paul. You're up to one of your old tricks. Tell me now, because if you don't, and I find out later, and you be sure I'll find out." She gave him another one of her stares. John Paul felt his face flush. "No more, I swear." His mother relaxed her grip and he dropped back to his chair. Eat your porridge and get off to school. And John Paul, he looked up at his mother. "Yes, Ma." "I'm watching you." She reached over the kitchen sink and pulled out a wooden spoon from the washing up bowl and waved it in front of him. "We're watching you." John Paul couldn't finish his porridge quick enough. His stomach was in knots, his legs shook, and his face was so hot it felt like his hair was on fire. He jumped up from the table, grabbed his school haversack and its precious cargo, and without looking back, he headed for the kitchen door and out into the back lane. Shifty and Robbo were already waiting for him at the end of the lane. "Okay, lads, everything's sweet." "Did your ma say anything?" Shifty asked. "Nah, she didn't suspect a thing." The other two smiled, a not very convincing smile. "Me ma asked what I was up to and why I was ready for school before she called me at least 3 times, Robbo said, as he looked around the empty streets to make sure his ma wasn't watching from behind a lamppost. "Look, Robbo," John Paul said as he grabbed the lapels of Robbo's jacket. "Say a word to anyone and I'll have your guts for garters." John Paul had no idea what garters were or how you made them out of people's guts, but that's what his dad always said to him and his brothers when he thought they were up to no good, so he knew it was a sort of terrible threat. St. Cuthbert's Grammar School was at the end of a long drive. On one side was an old Victorian manor house that was home to the priests who staffed most of the school, and next to it were 2 long corridors and classrooms that made up the main school. At the far end was the hall that overlooked the school playing fields and the school yard that had been the scene of John Paul's day of shame. Ever since a first-year boy had upended him as he tried to get his dinner money, he'd experienced problems with his protection racket. Groups of first-year boys now gathered in packs for self-protection, and if John Paul attempted to approach anyone, the others quickly gathered and told him to get lost. The local youth club karate class had never been as busy. That's why his new venture was so important. Not only would it make him some money, but might go some way to restoring his battered reputation. The 3 bandidos went into the classroom. The 3 bandidos went into the cloakroom, and John Paul handed over the first batch of pictures to his 2 compatriots. "Stick with the older boys. Don't let the prefects see you. Cash up front only, no credit. Understand?" "Yes, John Paul," Shifty and Robbo said in unison. They hurried out into the schoolyard and within minutes returned. "Selling like hotcakes. One lad took 5, Shifty said. "You're not coming out in the yard?" Robbo asked. "I'm guarding the pictures. Now piss off, you 2. John Paul smiled to himself. "They're going to take all the risk. I get all the reward," he said to no one. As the bell rang to herald the start of morning prayers, John Paul rattled with coins and his haversack was empty of pictures. Okay, you two, we meet up in the park tonight and we discuss our next step, okay? And with that, the three purveyors of pornography made their way into the main hall to say a prayer to thank God and the baby Jesus for a very profitable morning's work. The news of the pictures had spread quickly, and all during dinner time Shifty and Robbo were besieged by eager pubescent teenagers begging for pictures themselves. Those lucky enough to have bought them in the morning were now selling them on for a much higher price, and by the time they went home, some of the more provocative and revealing images were selling for a shilling. We need more magazines and we need them fast, John Paul told his two partners in the filthy picture business as they sat on the park shelter floor. Let's put all the money we made and buy more magazines, John Paul put out his hand to Shifty and Robbo, who handed over their hard-earned cash. We have a total of 8 shillings and a penthouse costs 5, so we can get one more for that, said Shifty. Great idea, said Shifty. We have a total of 8 shillings and a penthouse costs 5, so we can get one more for that, said Shifty. Great idea, Shifty, said John Paul. Exactly what I was thinking. The newsagents won't sell penthouse to kids, and even if they did, the Mars would know about it before we left the shop, Robbo added. John Paul and Shifty looked at each other. The smiles on their faces and the thoughts of easy cash disappeared in a mist of problems and disappointment. The three of them sat staring at the broken swings and the burnt-out slide until John Paul suddenly jumped up. I've got it! His crestfallen face now sporting a wide grin. We could steal them, Robbo said. That's a stupid idea, John Paul sped back. We'd get caught. No, we won't. The shop's always packed on a Saturday. Kids buying sweets, Dad's getting the football pink, and the grandda's after the racing post, Robbo continued. If we create a distraction of some sort, we could get away with it, Shifty said. Hang on a minute. I have an idea, John Paul said. Let's just nick them. Me and Shifty will start a fight between us, and as Mrs. Parker tries to stop us, Robbo grabs a couple of mags. Shifty and Robbo looked at each other. That's what we said. Yeah, well, you give me the bare bones of an idea. I've made a plan, so that's down to me. Shifty and Robbo both shrugged. This Saturday, said John Paul. This Saturday, then, said Shifty and Robbo. John Paul could hardly sleep last night. He now would have at least one, hopefully 2, brand new penthouse magazines, unblemished from kitchen waste, and his father's sugarless tea to sell. There'll be another 8 more, maybe 16 shillings. No, he thought, I'll double the price to 2p. I'll be £1 and 12 shillings. We would be rich. We could go to the pictures and get ice cream, or maybe even visit the new bowling alley. I could ask Mary McIntyre to go to the Italian ice cream parlour. Oh, maybe take her to the pictures, and in the dark, maybe steal a kiss. And another furtive investigation of a school cardigan. Life was suddenly all possibilities. So, what happened next? Listen in next Friday for the final episode of John Paul Docherty and the Mucky Mag. If you enjoyed this episode, then please support my podcast by buying me a coffee. Click the heart logo in the top corner of the website page and donate. If you're another podcast provider, then check out buymeacoffee.com and search for Jeff Price N3. Thank you. You can contact Telling Tales direct by emailing tellingtalesjeffprice@gmail.com. Until the next time, goodbye.